Okay, good afternoon, everyone. It's 1:03 p.m., so we're going to go ahead and get started with today's REAP webinar. Thank you for your attendance. I'm Michael Segala here, Housing and Urban Planning Consultant based in Fresno Clovis area. Robert Phipps is with Fresno COG, Executive Director. Him and I are co-hosts for this REAP webinar series that's been going on for 3 years now. This is our second to the last REAP webinar. The REAP program ends at the end of this calendar year. We will have one more webinar in January, and then we're closing up shop here. So it's been a great run. We appreciate everyone's attendance throughout these years. We hope you found these sessions useful to you in your planning practices. Let's see. We have a great team today, and I'm going to introduce Ryan in a couple of seconds here with Material Harnish, and he'll introduce the rest of his team. But for the past few months, they've conducted a small lot planning study to figure out if that's an option and what are some obstacles and policy recommendations for facilitating small lot planning in the valley and increasing affordability, density, and less vehicle miles traveled and everything else. So it's a good study. We look forward to that We look forward to the presentation. The presentation will last about 30 minutes, and then we'll open it up for question and answers. We might take some questions and answers along the way, might not. A few house rules. If you want to raise your hand, use the raise hand function. If you want to ask a question, that is, or you could use the question and answer function, or you could use the chat function. And either way, we'll be manning. Robert and I will be manning the questions, and we'll get to your question without a problem. This webinar should last about 1 hour and shouldn't go more than that. And APA credit, APA CM credit is AICP, that is, CM credit is available for this webinar as well. And that number was on the flyer, and I'll post that number to the chat box for everyone to see it as well. This webinar is being recorded. It will be posted to the SJV REAP website in about 2 days. And then everybody who's participating today will get a post-webinar evaluation. If you could fill that out and get it back to us, that would be great as well. So that's about it in terms of logistics. So Ryan Lester's with Material Harnish out of Sacramento, and he's going to introduce himself and his team and take it from there. Thank you, Ryan.
All right. Thank you for that introduction, Michael. Thank you for joining us here for the webinar to talk about our small lot planning study for the San Joaquin Valley. My name is Ryan Lester. I'm a project manager with Mintier Harnish, and I lead all of our firm's housing element update. We've got 2 6-cycle housing elements still hanging on, and then we've started 2 7-cycle as well. So it's been a fun run. With that, I will let our team introduce themselves, starting with Roger.
Good afternoon. I'm Roger Dale. We're part of the Mintier Harnish team. My firm is the Nadelson Dale Group, and we do real estate market analysis and economic development planning. So really happy to be here this afternoon.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Michael Gibbons. I'm a project manager with Mintier Harnish. For this particular project, I led the implementation section as well as some of the drafting of the sample ordinances and development standards. Day to day, I manage a series of projects throughout California and the San Joaquin Valley, including general plans, zoning codes, and subdivision regulations. So my experience is also both in private and in the public sector as well. So that really allows me to bring a unique perspective to projects. I've worked behind the planning counter. I understand the challenges of implementing kind of new and innovative best practices while also balancing goals of decision makers and community needs. So very excited to be working on this project and to share with you all that we've learned and ways to address small lot development in your jurisdiction. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Will Salsa. I'm an assistant planner with Mintier Harnish, working mostly on housing elements, general plans, zoning codes, and this great project as well. So happy to present on what we've found.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. So with that, quick agenda for what we'll talk about today. We're This presentation will kind of just walk through and summarize each of the chapters of the study. So I'll start off by summarizing kind of the introduction and purpose for the study. We'll work through existing conditions and trends analyses. And then we'll talk about the market conditions and financial feasibility analysis before concluding by talking about advantages, issues, and opportunities, and then finally implementing small lot housing development in the Valley. So with that, I'll get us started off with introduction and purpose. So this project, we contracted with SJV REAP. This was a state-funded project, really to investigate the potential for expanded small lot housing development in the Valley. This was about a 6-month project. And really our audience for this study is community development directors, city managers, council members, county supervisors, planning commissioners, and Valley planners. But also developers who may be kind of on the fence and, hey, is this feasible? How much of this planning is happening in the Valley currently? So with that being said, we really wanted our approach to be fairly accessible. We didn't want it to be overly detailed or in the weeds. And we really wanted to emphasize graphics, charts, figures, and just general readability. We wanted someone to be able to pick up this study, spend half an hour with it, and get some get some conclusions and maybe get some enthusiasm about these types of projects. So our goals for the study was really to identify housing needs and trends in the Valley, to examine the market based on available data, and see if we can indicate feasibility, and then to provide information on how to implement small lot housing in Valley jurisdictions. There were several key questions addressed throughout the study. These questions kind of guided our research as well as our analysis, and they're called out in the document as the document goes through. The study really looks to answer these questions. So in the current single family market, what is considered a small lot, right? Small is subjective. So what do Valley planners and developers actually consider a small lot these days? What's driving interest in reduced lot sizes? Where has small lot single family development occurred in the San Joaquin Valley? What are the constraints preventing developers from building small lot single family homes? And then finally, how can jurisdictions encourage small lot single family development in the Valley? So as we continue through the presentation, our team will highlight these questions and come back to them and summarize what we found. So to start the project, this was really the main information data points that we relied upon for the report. Of course, we used ACS data, et cetera, as appropriate, but really our study was really informed by stakeholder interviews. So we held stakeholder interviews with Valley planners and developers to try to get a better understanding of the current market for small lot housing development. We reached out to a lot more folks than these. These were the folks that had an hour and a half to spend with us to talk about our project, and we're very appreciative of the time that they spent with us. So through these interviews, they were really incredibly helpful for understanding development trends, the constraints imposed by local codes, and then issues faced by developers. Stakeholders also provided feedback on local needs and housing type preferences in the Valley, as well as the need for smaller, more affordable housing types. These stakeholder interviews really were crucial to our research and analysis, and we included a summary of the interviews in the appendix to the study. So with that, our first question to stakeholders was, what is a small lot these days? Okay, so what we heard was, while a 6,000 square foot lot may have been small in the past, due to land costs and other factors, the lots are now considered quite large. One stakeholder actually said that a 6,000 square foot lot is kind of like the modern equivalent to an estate lot, just because the cost of land and development are so high that you end up with a higher end market for those homes. So we really heard that, in 2024, a 2,000 square foot lot is considered small by Valley developers and planners. They're quite buildable. And we heard that some developers even have a liking for specific configurations. 40 by 60 was one that was mentioned. That would be approximately 2,400 square feet lot. So that's what we heard from stakeholders, and that's what we based our study on. The analysis investigates the potential for residential development down to 2,000 square feet. So while smaller lots can be developed, smaller than 2,000 square feet, particularly for tiny homes, our study doesn't investigate feasibility of lots smaller than 2,000. We kind of capped it at 2,000. And with that, I will let Will summarize chapter 2.
All right, thanks, Ryan. I think we're waiting on the slide to change. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to provide just a brief overview of the existing population and housing trends that helped us to really sort of quantify a lot of the stakeholder feedback that we received and lay some sort of foundation for the study. Data for this section comes from the U.S. Census 2000 for the years 2010 and 2020, as well as the American Community Survey for the years 2010, 2017, and 2022. So what does the data indicate? ACS data indicates that about 40% of households are moderate or severely cost burdened, so indicating a clear need for more affordable housing. We found that the growing gap between home prices and median income is one of the primary conditions putting the greatest constraint on homeownership in the Valley. And this is a really important key point that I'm going to return to in the next couple of slides here. And lastly, renters are disproportionately impacted by the limited stock of affordable housing in two key ways, one of which being that renters are more likely to live in overcrowded households. So the data indicates 64% of overcrowded households are renter households. And secondly, renters are more likely to be cost burdened. So 60% of cost burdened households are renter households. Next slide, please. Okay, so with some of those major points laid out, we can kind of dive into some of the details here and look at these key points that we use to inform the study. So first of which, population growth is placing a demand side pressure on the housing market throughout the Valley. So what this means is as population is increasing, and the data indicates that between 2010 and 2020, the population grew by about 9%. There's this demand side pressure for more housing, more people demanding more housing. Additionally, the existing housing supply is found to be insufficient in meeting this growing demand, and the rate of housing production is also not keeping up with this rate of demand. So this is placing a supply side pressure on the housing market. So both of these two pressures are working to kind of drive up prices. And the direct result of this, of course, being an increase in the cost of housing, particularly when looking at homeownership or for sale housing. And lastly, the rates of overcrowding and overpayment have increased in response to housing costs. So this is, seemingly a pretty obvious response as housing becomes more expensive. People are tending to live together, whether it be multi-generational households or friends coming together to live in a single home, as well as overpayment. As there is less availability, people are having to stretch beyond their affordability to find a place to live. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is figure 2.3 pulled directly from the study. It's titled Homeowner Affordability Gap for the years 2010 through 2022. And this is just kind of returning to that point I made above regarding the gap between what things cost and what people can afford. So here on the y-axis, we have annual income. And on the x-axis, we have years. So this is broken up into 3 points of time, 2010, 2017, and 2022. The blue line indicates the minimum annual income needed to purchase the average home in the Valley without being cost burdened. So that is the minimum annual income a household needs to be making in order to afford a home without paying 30% or more of their income towards home ownership. So as we can see, looking at 2010, excuse me, the red line is the actual median income for that given year. So in 2010, we can see that the minimum annual income needed to purchase a home was greater than that of the median income. And as we move along the x-axis to the year 2017, we can see that there's a shift for into a more favorable scenario in which the minimum annual income needed to purchase a home is below that of the median income for 2017, meaning that the average home price is attainable for the median income household. Now, this all changes dramatically when we move further along the curve to the year 2022 and see that the minimum annual income needed to purchase a home increases significantly by just about 105%. And while the median income increases at a substantial rate as well, 40% increase, it's not enough to keep up with this rising price that's driving that minimum annual income needed. We can see there's over a $22,000 gap between these two price levels in 2022. So next slide, please. Okay, so key question number 2, what is driving interest in reduced lot sizes? So this is just going to be a quick summary. I've already touched on a lot of these points, but just to bring it all together. So first of all, population is growing. The population is growing, and of course, people need homes, especially homes that are affordable. And so there's just a general interest in more affordable options for that growing population. Increasing land and construction costs. So what are some ways that we can reduce supply side costs? Well, of course, we can, build smaller homes using less resources, and we can build more units on less land as a means to stretch out the land costs over more units, so making development more feasible for developers. High cost of homeownership. So again, this demand side and supply side pressure is pushing homeownership upwards. So in the short run, we can work to address these pressures by increasing production, especially production of affordable units, such as reduced lot size, small lot, single family units. And then popularity of single family homes. So based on stakeholder feedback, it was pretty apparent that single family homes remain a popular typology among both homeowners or home buyers rather, and developers as well. This is a trusted format. There's much more experience. So this kind of gives small lot, single family an edge over, higher density multifamily projects, for example. The benefits of homeownership. So, an additional more affordable alternative provides accessible homeownership to a broader range of people, which can ultimately work to reduce that overcrowding and overpayment issue, while also supporting, in the long term, a more widespread accumulation of generational wealth, and keeping in mind that renters are disproportionately impacted with regards to overcrowding and overpayment. Increasing demand and insufficient supply. I think I covered these pretty extensively already, so I'm just going to move on to the final slide here. Okay, so key question number 3, where has small lot single family development occurred in the San Joaquin Valley? So this was a little bit of a small analysis we completed using 2022 assessor parcel data, which was compiled by the San Joaquin Valley REAP program using Urban Footprint. And what we found is that San Joaquin County has the largest small lot inventory among all 8 Valley counties. The city of Fresno has the largest small lot inventory among cities, and 44% of small lot parcels are between 4,000 and 5,000 square feet, as indicated in figure 2.7 in the bottom right corner there. So, the majority of these parcels are on the larger side, but with that said, we still have 32% in that sub 3,000 category. So historically, small lot parcels have been developed at a range of different sizes. So with that, I'll pass it off to Roger.
Before we move on, if I may, we have had a hand up for quite a while. Anna Hernandez. We can unmute you if you needed to ask a question or. Michael, can you do that? You're on mute.
She is unmuted at this moment.
Okay. So Anna, if you want to unmute yourself, if you have a question. Noticed your hand up for quite some time. Okay, and if not, yeah, okay, there we go. Thank you. Okay. Doesn't look like she is going to ask a question, so sorry for the interruption. Go right ahead.
Thank you, Robert. So again, I'm Roger Dale with the Nadelson Dale Group, and our part of this process was to look at the market feasibility and the financial feasibility from the standpoint both of consumers and developers for this type of project to occur on a larger scale throughout the valley in the coming years. And in looking at those questions of market demand and financial feasibility, we really looked at this from within the context of statewide economic trends, some of which Will touched on, but I'll just mention some of the highlights. So we know that population growth, both within the valley and in California overall, has placed pressure on housing prices and has increased housing demand. And at the same time, development costs, construction costs have contributed to higher housing prices. We also know that demand for new housing in the valley has been influenced not only by growth from within, but also from people coming, homeowners coming from other parts of the state where housing is less affordable. And potentially we've seen an increase in that trend during that period of time that Will showed on the chart that showed when prices started to greatly outstrip affordability and income levels, in part due to shifts that occurred during the pandemic, with people finding it more feasible to work in a remote location distant from their workplace. This may have contributed to home buyers or households being able to live in the more affordable communities within the valley while still having some tie to a job, for example, in the Bay Area. So all of these trends, both within the valley and within the larger context of the state, have contributed to conditions which we believe over time are likely to increase demand for small lot housing and also increase the attractiveness of that type of a product, both to home buyers as well as to developers. We also know that the Valley has a strong market preference, as Will also mentioned, for single-family detached housing. Just to put this in perspective, about 73% of housing units throughout the Valley are single-family detached units, and that compares to a number of in the high 50%, like 57% for the state. So there's definitely a preference for single-family detached housing, and potentially small lot development is a way that the market can respond to that preference for single-family detached housing, while at the same time create products that have the potential to be more affordable. And it's interesting that that preference within the valley and the difference between the valley and the state in terms of single-family detached being the predominant type of housing has not really changed very much over the past 15 or 20 years. So that's an established market trend that potentially could continue in a different format through small lot development. And for the reasons I've just described, population and household growth, we would expect to continue to be strong in the coming decades in the valley. And really our job as part of this planning process was to, at a big picture level, put some numbers on what those potential levels of demand might be. So to quantify demand and also to look at how that might translate into feasible and attractive development investment opportunities for the development community. Next slide. So first I'll talk about potential market demand for small lot units. So we start kind of with a top-down analysis in our model, and we looked at a 20-year period from 2024 to 2044. And in doing this, we evaluated population and household forecasts for each of the counties in our study area. And for those data, we looked for projections available from each county's COG, as well as state-level projections, which have been prepared fairly recently by the Department of Transportation as part of their Planning and Demand Forecasting, as well as the State Department of Finance. So if we look at the 8-county area, total housing demand for all types of units is projected at 282,000 units for that 20-year period. Of that total, we would project that about 205,000 units, so again, the large majority, would be for single-family detached housing. And then based on the modeling that we've done, which is subject to a number of assumptions that could be tested in different ways, but the modeling that we've done for this process, we believe that of that 205,000 roughly single-family detached housing units in the valley, that something like 56,000 of those might fall into this small lot category that we're describing. And interestingly, that has a strong overlap in terms of pricing and affordability with the valley-wide need to meet RHNA allocations or obligations. And it would, however, mostly be in the moderate and above moderate income units, but in those categories could meet about 16% of the valley-wide RHNA allocation. Next slide. Those same numbers that I just described for the whole valley, we've also done for the individual counties. And we see on this chart that for the total single-family demand for the whole valley, as I mentioned, is about 205,000. And that, of course, varies by county depending on size and growth capacity. For example, in the smaller county, Kings County, that total demand would be about 6,400 single-family detached units for that 20-year period, and going up to as much as 51,000 new units, single-family detached new units in San Joaquin County. And then within those counties, we've also projected the portion of that total demand that could be small lot units. And the overall number is about 27% of single-family detached units might be in that small lot category, and that percentage would vary by county, as is shown on the chart. Next slide, please. As part of this analysis and looking at the feasibility of these projects, both for developers and also their attractiveness potentially to consumers, we looked at some case studies, and we evaluated a total of 6 completed development projects in different parts of the valley. And those 6 projects collectively represented about 16 different home types or products. And those had lot sizes ranging from 1,981 square feet to 2,940 square feet. So right in that range that the earlier presenters talked about as what the definition of a small lot is in today's market. And we have, for each of these, kind of collected data about how well those projects sold, what the pricing was, and where possible, gotten insights from the developers about what this might tell us going forward about the potential for this type of product to increase in the valley and to address needs both for housing generally, but also affordable housing. What's interesting about this, among our key findings, is that small lot single-family homes have appreciated at a similar rate to other types of housing. So while the entry prices are lower, of course, than traditional single-family homes, the investment still seems to be sound from an appreciation standpoint. In percentage terms, they've increased at similar rates by and large compared to other types of single-family homes. Naturally, the total cost for small lot development is considerably less than traditionally sized lots. There are smaller amounts of land and other efficiencies that make this a relatively affordable way and cost-effective way to develop, while at the same time not significantly impacting the size of the actual units, but the real reduction is in the amount of land that surrounds them. And also noted that small lot development offers a comparable rate of return for builders compared to traditionally sized lots. We have, as part of this analysis, done a simple financial pro forma to compare the potential profitability of a traditional lot from a developer's perspective to a smaller lot development. And of course, it's challenging to characterize feasible versus infeasible when you're talking about such a large 8-county area and potentially many different product types even within the small lot category. But if we took a kind of what we think are average conditions and representative conditions of the types of development that might happen in the valley, our conclusions are that these projects are in fact feasible and profitable to the developer from the developer's perspective, and at least to the degree that traditional single-family housing is, and potentially even a little bit better rate of return. And we certainly believe that the demand from a market perspective and just a general efficiency perspective within this planning process, that the demand is definitely there for this type of unit, and we would expect it to be a major opportunity going forward, not only for the development community, but also to meet community-wide and valley-wide objectives in terms of housing production and housing affordability. So thank you.
All right. So now we'll jump into a summary of Chapter 4. So in addition to summarizing the stakeholder interviews, which can be found in the appendix, as I mentioned earlier, our team included a chapter in the study to kind of connect the dots between stakeholder input and implementation. So this chapter summarizes the advantages of small lot housing types, some of the issues faced by developers, and then opportunities to encourage increased production. I'll summarize each on the following slides. So the number one largest advantage, most obvious, is it's just an efficient use of land. So as you can see on the simple graphic here, when lots are smaller, more households can be accommodated and greater density can be achieved. Other advantages we heard are related to the potential to increase value or profit of a home. The idea here is that the home is the highest value asset of the property, much more so than the outdoor space in the parking areas. Small lot housing really uses a greater proportion of the lot for the home and works to maximize that most valuable asset of the property. Reduced development costs. We've kind of touched on this, but smaller homes cost less to construct and are more affordable by design. Land and construction cost reductions really make a big difference in achieving a more affordable product. And more affordable homes mean that more households can access them, obviously. Small lot developments also work to encourage a variety of housing types. So by embracing them, you really can work to encourage a variety of housing types to meet a variety of housing needs in your community. Other things we heard, small lot single-family homes really tend to blend into the existing character of the valley. Single-family detached homes are so popular in the valley. These are single-family detached homes. And then the reduced per unit cost of offsite improvements. We heard a little bit about this. Basically, if you have to install a road or do a water or sewer connection, the more units you can spread that out, those costs out among then the lower the per unit cost. So there's some savings there. And then issues. So what are some of the constraints preventing developers from building small lot single family homes? So first, land costs and construction costs just are a general constraint to production, not just small lot housing. The cost of land and construction both fuels the desire for small lot housing, but also constrains the development, as things are just really expensive right now. It's hard to produce. Some constraints imposed by local codes include traditional zoning requirements for like lot size, setbacks, maybe open space requirements, parking requirements, and then discretionary review processes that add time and cost and really lack approval certainty. So anytime we can put anything in place to make approvals more certain for developers, that can be a big incentive. Especially for newer housing types, developers don't really want to just wade out there with newer types. We want to make sure that our in the way that we implement the zones, we're providing approval certainty. So subjective design guidelines can be really problematic. There's really an opportunity to adopt some objective design standards. And then, of course, NIMBY opposition can really challenge approval certainty as well and be another disincentive. So those are some of the issues that we heard from our stakeholders. And then as far as opportunities, right? So small lot development really provides an important opportunity to increase capacity and affordability, typically in low density zones that are often our highest resource areas, where HCD, the state, and just good planning practices tells us we want to increase both capacity and affordability, right? Helping to promote housing mobility, things like that. A lot of the goals of the housing element, right? And then local jurisdictions really have an opportunity to evaluate and revise development standards to be more flexible or just to provide reduced development standards. And in the process, our stakeholders really hammered this home. You have the opportunity to engage local and regional developers, to talk to them about their constraints, talk to them about some of the issues with the zoning code and how those might be navigated, right? And then further, so there's an opportunity to prioritize infrastructure improvements that reduce offsite improvement costs. This would be the same for, multifamily housing, et cetera, but anywhere where you can provide some incentives with by assisting with those costs can really help promote affordability. Embracing SB 9 lots and pre-approved ADUs, right? They're not exactly small lot, single family development, but they get at some of the same benefits, right? Increased capacity, faster processing, neighborhood compatibility, those things. And then finally, there's an opportunity to identify publicly owned surplus sites with potential for residential development. Most cities and counties are doing this already through their housing element or through a program from their housing element. But really, publicly owned surplus sites that can be transferred or sold to an affordable housing developer can really incentivize affordable development. They could also be used to incentivize small lot housing development. So with that, I will turn it over to Michael to conclude about implementation.
Thanks, Ryan. So at this point, we've shared with you really the benefits of small lot development, the economic viability, and some of the common problem areas that developers and jurisdictions find in encouraging small lot. But what does that really mean? And I guess more importantly, how do you as a jurisdiction go about realistically implementing and encouraging small lot development? So in an attempt to really answer those questions, our team developed a series of steps and best practices that we feel jurisdictions can use to implement and encourage small lot development. The steps are, let's say, further detailed in the report, but generally we are broken this process down into 4 steps. First being evaluate your zoning code provisions. Within that would also be subdivision regulations. 2 would be identify areas within your jurisdiction where small lot development is feasible, realistic, desired. And then 3rd would be based on that, updating your regulations to encourage the development. And then 4th, it really ends with incentivizing, encouraging developers and creating processes in which small lot development becomes potentially a preferred style or a preferred typology. Next slide. So in addition to the steps that I'll go through, our team also developed some example development standards and a small lot sample ordinance for consideration that really reflect the feedback received during the stakeholder interviews and our experience working in other jurisdictions. So I'll dive a little bit deeper into the small lot ordinance at the end. But first, next slide, I want to start talking about what is the first step in evaluating your zoning code. And really, the first step is establishing base conditions. We need to know what is on the ground now. And that starts with looking at your development standards and your regulations. So this would include lot size requirements, setback and yard standards. What are parking ratios? I think there's a question about parking in the Q&A right now. But looking at building height, lot coverage, do these standards as they exist today facilitate this style of development? And so you're going to take a comprehensive overview on your part to determine that. Next slide. So some best practices in order to do that, I would say really start with an audit. And this can be self-led internally. This can also be farmed out to a consultant, as sometimes it's done, but it's doing a comprehensive overview of your regulations. And it can be through the view or through the lens of small lot development. But it's looking at, like I had mentioned earlier, what are the development standards that are preventing this? Another best practice is, and I'll preface this report is really supposed to look at San Joaquin Valley, but your jurisdictions are unique, and you have locally specific contexts and developers that some of these typologies or some of the development standards might not apply to your jurisdiction. So really conducting locally specific research, talking with your community stakeholders, your elected and appointed officials, your developers, your residents is also a place to start, as they will also be able to tell you where the deficiencies are in your codes or in your regulations. And the fourth best practice when analyzing your zoning and subdivision regulations comes down to looking at other jurisdictions, looking at successful implementation of different subdivisions or different developments, different zones, different ordinances, and using those as a sample or somewhat as a guide. Next slide. So once we have done an audit or analysis of our development standards and subdivision standards, the next step is to identify opportunity areas. Where is small lot desired, feasible? And really that starts with looking at access to transit services. So one of the common holdups that we had talked with and heard through the stakeholder interviews, one of them being parking. And as we know, that as the state is continuing to update laws every year, there has been a more of a push towards centering development around transit services or existing transit stops. So small lot development might result in less and fewer parking spaces. So it's really important that we provide easy, accessible access to public transit where feasible. Another area to look at where small lot development might be beneficial is underused parcels. So those that have gone through a housing element update probably already have a list of underutilized parcels, but that is also a place to start. Another area to look at potentially that might be beneficial would be existing low density areas within your jurisdiction. And then with that, looking at the infrastructure within those. So is there existing infrastructure in a portion of your jurisdiction that you're looking to have small lot development? The costs associated with bringing utilities and infrastructure in might not make it feasible or pencil out for a developer. Next slide. So how do we do that? One would be to work with your local developers and see where and have an open communication as to where is development desired, where are they looking at? And secondly would be doing GIS mapping and analysis on your own. So pulling up your zoning map, digging into existing land uses today versus what is your zoning, looking at non-conforming, and essentially highlighting areas, the jurisdiction that would be prime for this style of development. Next slide. So the third step is once we've identified development standards that are preventing this, and secondly, once we've now identified some areas of your jurisdiction that would be beneficial to incorporate some of these small lot development standards, we actually have to go through updating the land use controls and policies. And really those are your general plan, specific plans, your development regulations, including your zoning and subdivision. And I would say most importantly, as this kind of report is intended for, is updating your policymakers and your decision makers, educating them as to the benefits of small lot development, encouraging them to support you in your efforts as staff to also implement these standards, as it will make your job easier as well. And we know these are, best planning practices. Next slide. So to do this, we have a couple of tips for you. One of them would be policy alignment. So first and foremost, look at state law, look at aligning with any of your regional housing needs, and then see how small lot development fits in with that. The next, is we've kind of hammered home already, and what was really informed this report, is stakeholder collaboration and feedback. Again, this report is providing an overview of the San Joaquin Valley, but your jurisdiction is unique. And communicating and having open dialogue with developers is essential. And when also updating the land use policies, it's important that we are looking at flexibility. There's often this balance between flexibility and certainty. And so with small lot development, if small lot development is something that is desired in your jurisdiction, it's ensuring that you're creating and you're developing standards that are flexible enough that make it desirable to actually be a feasible typology. And once we've done all of that, we've not only have identified problem areas in our regulations, we've identified some opportunity areas within our jurisdiction, and we've updated our regulations. Now we need to incentivize it and encourage it. And how do we do that? And so some of them are looking at financial incentives, encouraging the use of density bonuses, potentially expediting review and permitting processes, changing something that might require a higher level of discretionary review to a ministerial review, and looking at ways to encourage fee reductions or waivers. Next slide. And our best practices here are really balancing those incentives. What is meeting the desire of a developer versus residents versus your policy and decision makers, and what's going to actually be a realistic and palpable for each. The next is targeted application. So it might not be desirable to, or it might be desirable for a jurisdiction to just try small lot development on a smaller scale, maybe a project specific. So you might not want to apply it jurisdiction wide. So maybe coming up with an opportunity to apply that to a specific property or a specific area. And then next, it's monitoring and adjustment. Zoning and subdivision regulations, while we like to keep them set in stone, they change over time. And it's important that you, as your jurisdiction representatives and your planners, that we are updating and we are monitoring areas that need to change to address needs of local concern, updated best practices and changes in housing law. So to make this hopefully as easy as possible for you all, not only have we broken these steps down further in the report, but we've also produced a series of development standards and a small lot sample ordinance. Say this is merely a sample. The way that your jurisdiction would like to implement or encourage small lot development might be very different from a small lot ordinance, standalone ordinance. But in this case, we've provided one that we feel is a good base. If this was something that you wanted to bring before elected and appointed officials, it's something that you can work with. So in here, we have broken it down into your typical ordinance with a purpose and intent statement, then going and looking at the applicability. We have in here some application and project review procedures that would be somewhat streamlined from potentially some other approvals, some sample development standards. Really, again, these have been really teed up and developed in our interviews with stakeholders. And it's just some of the admin provisions as far as access, maintenance, and separability. So very strongly encourage you to take a look at that and really modify that to what's going to work best for your jurisdiction. So in total and in summary, how can jurisdictions actually encourage and implement this? And so it starts off with auditing your regulations, looking at where deficiencies are, then starts with identifying opportunity areas where you can feasibly, realistically implement small lot development. Then it looks at, then you should look at actually updating your development standards to encourage it and informing your policymakers about the benefits, the pros, the cons, and really determining if it's something that your jurisdiction would like to implement. So that will do it for our formal presentation. I'm sure there are a series of questions, a lot of questions you would like to ask. So I will hand it back to Michael and Robert to facilitate the question and answer. But thank you very much, and we look forward to hearing your questions.
All right, thank you. Let's go first to Manuel Campos, who's had his hand up for a while. Go ahead, Manuel.
Man, you need to unmute yourself.
Hi, good afternoon. Everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
I'm sorry. That was an accident. I don't know what happened there. So I'll go ahead and lower the hand.
Okay.
But great presentation.
All right, Robert, you want to read the questions?
Yeah, so we do have several questions in the Q&A, beginning with Brandon Smith. For the developed projects, have developments containing single-car garages caused a parking problem? Our city requires 2 parking spaces per unit non-tandem. Any thoughts on that? Don't tell me you guys are stumped already.
Michael, do you want to jump on that one?
Yeah, I can take that. I would say yes, I would say that the traditional parking requirements for single family development were brought up as a constraint. Some jurisdictions have solved that by allowing tandem parking, or at least counting tandem parking. So if that is an option that is desirable, or your jurisdiction is open to, certainly a reasonable change or standard to make, or allowability of tandem. But yes, we have identified typical parking regulations as a potential constraint to small lot.
Okay, and a couple of related questions. Claudia Calderon asks, have developers been allowed to deviate from the traditional street standards for small lot development?
I would say yes. I mean, the process by which a developer would deviate or might differ from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, but there might be flexibility that you build in to your ordinance, where you have a director level approval or some director level review, or if there is a degree of variation from the standards, requiring a discretionary permit instead. So maybe structuring it so if you follow these standards, you're going to go through a ministerial process. But if you deviate, we need to know that it's a little bit different than what we expected in our ordinances. So go before their planning commission to receive some level of discretionary review. But I would recommend some flexibility in small lot development standards.
Yep, or change your standards. That's another option.
Correct.
Okay, and again, related, but I kind of already addressed, also interested in the parking issue. So many cars and trucks do not fit in a classic garage. So I don't know if there's anything to say to that hasn't already been kind of addressed.
You know, parking is a big issue for everybody. Obviously, you know, with small lot developments, you typically get, you know, 1 parking unit, you know, on the parcel. So yeah, considerations for parking otherwise should be, you know, taken into account. Sometimes shared parking or like shared use kind of situation can alleviate some of that.
And also just access to transit services. That's also really important. If you are going to be reducing that standard of parking, knowing that we all still drive vehicles as our predominant mode of travel, at least making it easy and accessible somewhat for those that may not have access to vehicles, or to give people an option to give up their vehicle, right? If they are located at convenient, accessible access to public transit.
Okay. Cynthia Marsh in Lodi says beyond the zoning code, beyond the zoning code development standards, I'd also look at PUEs. In Lodi, we have our own electric utility, which requires a PUE in the first 10 feet on private property from rear of sidewalk. Another issue is lot coverage. With smaller parcels, more areas paved, and we've had some urban flooding issues with recent storms. Thus, from the planning side, we can change the development codes, but we run into challenges negotiating with our utility providers and public works.
Yeah, and I will say those are very real jurisdiction-specific constraints that will have to be analyzed and worked through to develop on a large scale, right? It might be a little easier in infill opportunities, right? But if you're doing a larger scale, small lot subdivision, those things can really be a constraint that need to be evaluated and navigated.
I'd also add to that and recommend bringing those departments, those divisions into the conversation as soon as possible so that you can address specific concerns or potentially even build in standards that would alleviate those concerns through the process.
Okay. Are there any local agencies that currently have an ordinance in place for this type of development or have a draft plan in the works? As far as I know, there are several, right?
Yeah, there are several. There's a lot of development happening, obviously in Fresno, Clovis area, in Visalia as well. As far as what we found, a lot of small lot developments are processed through a plan development or plan unit development process that actually can be a constraint sometimes. So we're encouraging jurisdictions to look at those processes. They can really help deviate from standards when you need to, but also the review process can be a constraint. So while it is important, we encourage jurisdictions to move towards a more ministerial approach, adopting your own ordinance. Yeah.
Right, right. What about ADUs and JADUs? Are you allowing them in these smaller spaces? Because that might cause additional parking and space issues.
Yeah, they do have to be allowed, the same as for a regular single family home by state law or the jurisdiction's ordinance, which may be less restrictive. But there may be, if you have a parcel that's very built out with the small lot home, right? Adding an ADU becomes a little bit more challenging just because you have less space to work with. But again, just like with a normal single family home, you can't require extra parking for an ADU. You can't require it for a small lot single family home either.
Okay. What would be the typical lot coverage in a small lot development?
In our development standards, and at least the ones that we proposed, 70% lot coverage ended up being somewhat feasible. Now, what that doesn't include, though, are open space requirements. And so if your jurisdiction has open space requirements for single family, that would also have to be taken into consideration. But at least what we have found with the lot size that we've presented and analyzed, that 2,000 square foot, and the setbacks, 70% lot coverage it was at least in the realm of a realistic development. It's something that could actually pencil out.
Okay, thank you. Have you seen where a public space requirement for small lots has been used successfully to account for the loss of private backyard open space?
We did not investigate that as part of this study.
Okay.
But it certainly could be a tool that could be utilized to overcome some of the constraints.
All right. In the example of small home shown in Madera, it looked like the price per square foot began at $285. Is that a good per square foot cost for construction in Madera? I'm just trying to figure out if the cost for construction is really reduced by the small lot development.
I'll take that one if I can. So we looked at in the cost, or I'm not, the $285, I'll have to look back in the report. I'm not sure if that's referring to a sales price per square foot or a cost per square foot. But in our analysis where we looked at the construction cost, it wasn't specific to Madera, but the cost per square foot is on average lower. The construction cost per square foot for small lots is on average lower. It's not so much that the building costs are lower, but there are other site costs, which of course are lower because of the smaller site, and also the infrastructure and offsite costs that get divided over a larger number of units. Those all have the effect of reducing the total cost per square foot when you're looking at it as an all-in cost, just because of the greater efficiencies with putting more units on the land, having fewer requirements then for site improvements, and also having a more efficient allocation of the infrastructure costs among more units.
Very good, thank you. Okay, and then kind of a two-part comment. It seems as though most developers in the valley are adverse to going up, such as the three-story units you see in many Bay Area communities. And then secondly, also the state could really assist with small lot development or condo development by passing legislation that limits many frivolous lawsuits that come with condo development. Michael, did you pay this guy?
No. But we did cover that in a different workshop.
Yeah, we did address that last one in particular. Any thoughts on either of those? Most developers in the valley are adverse to going up the 3 stories.
Well, I can't speak to, whether or not that's factual. Obviously, that's someone's opinion, but I can say that a lot of valley jurisdictions don't allow 3-story development in single-family zones. So it's probably a little bit of both, where it's not a product type that, 3-story homes are allowed a lot of places, so not a lot of developers are doing them. And so that leads to uncertainty over that 3-story single-family home housing type.
There's a big case here in Fresno with a 4-story that's caused a lot of controversy on our one big expressway in town. So yeah. And then secondly, the state could really assist with small lot development or condo development by passing legislation that limits many frivolous lawsuits that come with condo development.
Yeah, NIMBY opposition was something we heard a lot in the stakeholder interviews, just public opposition to projects in someone's area or projects that have greater density in someone's area. Certainly is not specific to small lot housing development, just to development generally. And so that may be the case, yeah.
Okay. There are beautiful examples of, these are beautiful examples of small lot homes, but I just miss the room for large trees. Plus, many of the trees shown will not be planted too long due to utilities conflicts. So more of a comment than a question, I guess.
Yeah.
And then to add to that comment, we've had proposed development at 3 and 4 stories, although multifamily, that were opposed heavily by the public.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, right.
Yeah, and what we've heard is that single family small lot homes are actually better received than the typical kind of older style larger apartments, right? There is a preference in the valley for single family detached housing, and these are a one-off of that.
Okay, and I do see we have a hand raised, it looks like.
Rob Holt, go ahead.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I appreciate all of your comments and responses. I actually was the planner on that Fresno project, the 4-story that was opposed. So I know all about that, but yeah, that's why I'd asked about the, I guess, alternative to planned developments, because in our city, we have to notice those that could potentially be appealed to find a more ministerial process to get that going. And I supervise all the subdivisions here, so I just was curious, but I do appreciate everyone's comments.
Thank you, Rob. And then another question in the Q&A, most of the diagrams shown in the slide referred to the net lot sizes. Did you look at the gross areas and densities?
Yeah, so for this, you know, we talk about the difference between net and gross, but really we provided analysis based on net. We didn't get further into that. Obviously, you know, you're going to have some setbacks and some requirements where you know, development can't happen within the parcel, and you're going to want to account for that and evaluate those requirements as part of your zoning code evaluation.
All right. And that was the last question. I know we are over time. We do want to be respectful of people's time. So if there are no other questions, Michael, I hand it back to you.
Yeah, thank you. And a lot of the questions will allude to our next January webinar on objective design standards. We're looking at that for the San Joaquin Valley and what that means for cities who have to incorporate that, which could help in sort of facilitating some of these projects or issues we talked about on this webinar. So look out for that. I'll send an email to the participants in the next day or so, reminding them about the evaluation and that the materials are posted. Ryan, I will post this PowerPoint as well, if you don't mind. So that's it, folks. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.